Everyone has their own view of what God looks like. If I was to pass out a piece of paper to everyone today and have each one of you draw a picture of God, the pictures would be quite a variety. There'd be quite a variety of responses that we would have. What we think about God and what we think He is like and what we think that He looks like is really different things. They would be all as different as fingerprints. There'd be no two alike in this room. But of course, none of us would be able to accurately describe God. We'd not be able to accurately draw that picture of who God is. God never allowed His people to draw or to build an image of Him. And one of the main reasons for that is because there's nothing on earth, that anything that's created, that's on earth, that was created, nothing could come even close to accurately depicting who God is. So that's the main reason for that. But our finite minds cannot even conceive of an infinite God. It's just beyond our even mental capacity. All we're able to understand is what He reveals to us. And even then, it's sometimes difficult to grasp that. We can't even grasp that sometimes. A study of God's names is a great way to begin to discover who God really is. And as we consider each name, as we study it each of these weeks ahead, as we study these names, we'll start to understand these names, and hopefully we'll be able to put these pieces together that help us understand who God is and, in a sense, what He looks like. Now, last week we looked at the name Elohim. It's the all-powerful Creator, is how we define that. The first chapter of Genesis uses the name Elohim to speak of God in His creative nature, in His creative, all-powerful, in His awesome power. So now we're going to look at the next name that God has revealed to us. But to really understand this, we need to look at the life of Moses a little bit. So if you'll turn over to Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3, if you haven't done that already. Exodus 3. Now this man, Moses, had such a promising future in the palace of Pharaoh. But he became a fugitive and a very insecure person. Because of the murder that he committed and the fleeing from Egypt that he had to do, he seemed to no longer fit into anybody's group. He was no longer an Egyptian, and he never really became a Hebrew at that time. The Hebrews did not see Moses as one of their own. He was rejected from both groups, and after he committed that murder, and after he ran from Egypt, and after he went to hide, he spent 40 years in another land tending sheep. So he became a shepherd for 40 years. Now, a shepherd spends many long, lonely, boring hours all by himself. He never really develops any people skills. He never has any conversation skills, rarely has any people to talk to. So there's no way for him to build those skills. So when God shows up in this burning bush and He reveals Himself to Moses, He's letting him know what the plans are going to be in the near future. Moses starts giving excuses. And we know this story, but we want to look a little closer here. And he tells God that he can't speak, and he's not eloquent. Well, think about it. He spent 40 years not really dealing with people. He's had no real conversation skills, so the excuse that he's making is starting to make a little sense. We can understand why he would have an excuse like that. Remember also, for 40 years, Moses has been hiding from Pharaoh. So now this idea of walking into his palace didn't seem like something that he would be too eager to do. But God's plan and God's purpose is always for God's glory. He has a purpose for each thing. So now let's look at this next name that God gives us for Himself. Chapter 3, let's start in verse 1. It says, Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Now I can't help by just reading these verses. First of all, I wonder what Moses thought. Now, it's easy for us to see the big part of this picture of what he was thinking, because here he's looking at this bush that's on fire, but it's not burning up. And he already gave kind of an instance of what he's thinking. He wants to see what this is all about. But there's another thing that happens here, and I wonder what he thought about that. Because I don't know if you've noticed it here, but that bush spoke his name. So the voice that came out of that bush knew who he was. And that's a story, that's a thought, that's a lesson just in itself as we look at that. Because that means that God, Elohim, that we looked at last week, Elohim knows your name. And that's an important thing. That means that you are not a stranger to him. He already knows who you are. And that's a comforting and a challenging thought to us as well. Now let's go on in verse 5. It says, "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Now, if you were here last week, you should be able to see the name that we talked about last week in these verses. Hopefully you saw that. Did you see it in verse 6? In verse 6 it says that God was speaking from the bush and he said, "I am the God of your father." Now the word that we learned last week, the name that we learned, it says, we can rephrase this, we can say that he's saying, "I am the Elohim of your father." Or he's saying, "I am the Almighty Creator God of your father. I am the Elohim of Abraham. I am the Elohim of Isaac. I am the Elohim of Jacob." At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at Elohim. Can you identify a little bit with the feelings that he must have been having at this time? He's now realizing that he's talking with the Almighty Creator God, the one who created everything, the one who is all-powerful, who brought this world into existence by just speaking a word. That's who he's talking to, and he's starting to recognize that thought. And if you were there, wouldn't you be afraid too? We would be shivering in our boots. We'd be so scared of this. So God continues on then in verse 7. It says in verse 7, "The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" To me, that's an interesting question that he asks the Creator. He's saying, "Who am I?" And God said, "I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you.' And they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you." Now, after Moses asked God that question, "Who am I?" he then asks God a second question. He asks him, "And who are you?" He asks both questions there. Who am I? And then he says, "Who are you?" He was asking God what his name was. So during this conversation that Moses is having with this bush, God speaks his name. He tells him what his name is. And he even doubles it up by showing the strength of it. He doubles it up. Not only did he say that his name is I am, but he says, "My name is I am who I am." Now, some people have taken this to be a snotty answer from God. He's being a smart aleck here, and he's being a little dismissive of who Moses is. He's not saying, "I am who I am, so just forget about it." That's not the attitude at all. He's saying in such power and strength, he's saying, "I am who I am." Some translators and some interpreters of this have said, "I am who I have always been." And I like that translation. I like that version of it. That's a good way to look at it. I am who I have always been. The God who spoke from this burning bush is the same God who worked in the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So what God was saying here, he's saying, "I am the God of your past. I am the God of your present. And now let's look at the future as I am the one who will lead you before Pharaoh. So he's covering all sides of this with Moses. And this is a very significant thought right here that we see in this verse. It's one of the key verses in the entire Bible, what we're seeing here. He's saying that his name is I am. Now in the English, this is translated as I am because it comes from the verb to be. That's how we look at it. It is the verb to be. Remember when you were in school and you had to conjugate verbs? You had to conjugate these words in different ways. And we would conjugate these verbs, and whether you took a foreign language, whether you were taking Spanish or whatever other language you were taking, but you did it in English as well, and you had to conjugate these verbs. And we hated it, I know, when we were in school, but we had to do it. And what we would do in English, if we were to do it in English, we would conjugate the verb to be. We would say, I am, he is, they are. That's why we would conjugate that verb. I am, he is, they are. So by Elohim saying that his name is the verb to be, he's saying that his name is tied to the very idea of being. His name is being. And his name is tied to the idea of life itself. And that's an important thing. What he's saying is, I am. What he's saying is life. I am life. I am all existence. To be is to live. To be at its very foundation is to have life. So that's what he's saying. I am all life. So the name that Elohim is giving Moses at this time implies that Elohim is absolutely life. He is absolutely self-existent. He is all existent. He is the one who within himself possesses all life, and he possesses all existence. He and he alone is the one that is this. And that's what he's telling him. I am who I am. Now the word that's used here, translated from the original, for the word that means to be, the word is Yahweh. Now maybe you've heard that name before. It's actually a translation from the verb to be. It's Yahweh. In the English, it has become known as the name Jehovah. So if you ever hear either one of those names, Jehovah or Yahweh, you're talking about the same name. It's the same part of God that we're dealing with here. Now, we're not going to get into the depth of the spelling of this name. There's another side to this story of the spelling of this name and the reverence behind this name Yahweh and how it came into being. It's really a fascinating study, and how the Jewish people would not even say this name because of the reverence involved in it. We're not going to get into that because of the time involved with that. But what we need to know right now for our purposes is that Elohim is introducing himself to Moses as Yahweh. He's introducing himself as Jehovah. He's saying, I am who I am. So now let's read on in verse 15. It says, God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. So basically what we're seeing right here is somewhat of a repeat of what we just saw in verse 6. If you look back to verse 6, we just saw that he said that he is Elohim of his father. He is the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But if you look closer in this in verse 15, you see something else that's been added here. Elohim added a name. He added the name the Lord. He said, the Lord, the Elohim of your fathers. So now what we're starting to see right here, we're starting to see a little clue here. We're seeing an English clue right here so that we can understand and identify this name in our English Bibles. And we'll get into that in just a second here. But last week, we said that normally when you see the name God, capital G, little o, little d, it's the English translation of the name Elohim. That's why I've been using that right now. It's Elohim is what it was. And we defined who Elohim was, the creator God, last week. But now when you see this word Lord in the Bible, it's translated from the name Yahweh or Jehovah. So it's a different name right now. But as you look at this verse, and you look at this in verse 15, you see that word. Do you see anything special or strange or different about that word? The word Lord. Do you see anything different there? Go ahead, you can try it. It's all capitals. You don't see that anyplace else. It's all capitals. Now that's a very important reason why we have that there. We need to know that. It's helpful in our English translations. We are not Hebrews. We don't know the Hebrew language. And so the original language that it comes from, we don't know those. So what we're seeing right here is a favor that the English translators are doing for us. We saw that in the word God, as we said last week. So now this is a favor that they're doing for us in the translation. So when they did the translation and they saw this word Yahweh or Jehovah, they translated it into Lord with all capital letters. So as we're reading, we can understand this name. So it's helpful. But as you read through the Bible, now we're talking specifically in the Old Testament right here, as you read through the Old Testament, you'll also see the word Lord with a capital L and a little O-R-D. You also see it that way. Now, the reason why that is we'll have to explain that next week, because that's another name that God gives. He gives another name when it's used as Lord with a capital L-O-R-D. We'll explain that next week, why the same name is used and why it's spelled with the caps and so on. But that's next week. But for right now, we just want to take it slow and understand this a little bit better. So we're going to look at just this word Lord in all capital letters for now. So what's the difference then? What's the difference in this? What's the point of giving this new name? Why is Yahweh or Jehovah any different from the name Elohim that we saw last week? What's the difference? As you read through the Old Testament, you're going to see, first of all, that this is the most frequent name of God that's used. This name is found over 6,800 times in the Old Testament. So it's an important part. If Elohim is God's creative and powerful name, Jehovah is God's personal name. And this is how we need to keep this split. It's God's personal name. It's the name that God gave Moses when Moses asked him, "What is your name?" So when we study the name Elohim, we study the God who is the creator. And we talk about his power and his presence and his work. But when we talk about Jehovah, we're talking about his person. We're talking about his character and who he really is. Elohim is the side of God who created the heavens and the earth. Jehovah is the side of God who relates with his creation personally. When God is dealing with his people, when he's speaking to them in some way, we see this throughout the Old Testament. When God is speaking to the people, that's a relationship. So most of the time when you see God speaking to the people, we see the Lord says to them, and all capital letters. That's usually what we'll see. Now, there are some exceptions to that, which we'll see along the way. The exceptions to that, you have to look at the context of why suddenly we read in this particular passage that Elohim speaks to the people. There's reasons for that at certain times. But what we're seeing here, for the most part, it's generally accepted that this is the personal relationship that God has with his people. So it's using the word Jehovah right here, or Yahweh. That's why even in the first chapter of Genesis, when we saw that last week, all we saw in that chapter was Elohim. It was always God doing this because there was no relationship that had been built yet. He was building the creation at that point, so there was no relationship yet. So that's why you see Elohim throughout the first chapter of Genesis. But what we want to see in this is that a person can believe in Elohim without really knowing Jehovah. And that's the idea that we need to look at here. In fact, many people believe in God. Many people believe in God, Elohim. But they don't always believe in the God, they don't always know the God in whom they believe. I messed that one up royal. Many people believe in God, Elohim, but they don't know the God in whom they believe, Jehovah. And that's the difference in this. Jehovah is the God who personally reveals himself to us. Often he reveals himself to us through trials, through struggles, through difficulties. And one of the first characteristics that we discover about Jehovah as we've looked at this is that he is a person. He is a real person. He is I am. He is the I am. And this is significant because it lets us know that we don't live in an impersonal universe as the evolutionists want us to believe. We live in a universe that's controlled by a very personal God. God isn't a force who just moves about. He's just not going haphazardly around places. It's not like the old Star Wars movies when they said, "May the force be with you." That's not God. That's not Jehovah. That's not what we're talking about here. He is a very real, very living, very personal God who has emotions, has an intellect, and has a will, and wants to have that relationship with us. So then how do we know, how can we get to know God then as Jehovah? It's kind of easy to get to know him as Elohim, the all-powerful God. But how can we get to know him better as that relationship, Jehovah? Turn over to Exodus chapter 3 because we'll get chapter 33 in Exodus, and we'll get a pretty good idea of how we can get to know Jehovah better. Exodus chapter 33, just a few pages over if you're still in chapter 3. But Exodus chapter 33, we're going to start reading in verse 18. And it says, "Then Moses said, 'Now show me your glory.' And the Lord said, 'I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, Jehovah, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion.' But he said, 'You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live.' Then the Lord said, 'There is a place near me where you may stand on a rock, where my glory passes by. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen.'" Now, did you notice that in those first few verses? It's God uses his name. He says, "When I pass by in front of you, I will say the Lord. I will say Jehovah." He's purposely giving that name, Jehovah. And then he seems like it's out of the blue. He goes on to say, "I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion." He's right there defining himself as the relationship. I have this relationship. That's why I have to give the name Jehovah at this point. Now, this particular event that we just read took place sometime after the burning bush that we read earlier. It's sometime later. And this takes place after the plagues in Egypt. It takes place after the crossing of the Red Sea. It takes place after the giving of the Ten Commandments. So we're a little bit down the road right now. So what we're finding is Moses is going about his work as leader of these people now. He is now the leader, and he's leading these people on their journey through the desert. And that's what we're finding here. And what we find, there's a few verses here, and we skip through those things, but there's verses here that say that God and Moses met regularly, and they spoke with one another as friends. Think about that relationship, first of all, the relationship that they had. They spoke together as friends. They met together regularly. But here we see that Moses then goes a little bit farther. He takes one more step. He says, even though we've got all this relationship together, Moses says, "Can I see you? Can I see you?" And here what we just read, we see Jehovah's answer to him. We see what his answer was to him. Now sometimes it might be the case in our own lives that we don't have a closer relationship with God. And some of the reason for that is because sometimes we just don't have the desire. We just don't want to. We don't want to have that relationship with him. Now, we'll never say that, especially when we're here on Sundays inside these four walls. We would never say that, but our lives speak louder than what we say. And it shows that we just don't want to have that relationship. We get too busy in our lives. We're too distracted to ask God for any more of a relationship. Moses could have been satisfied with the burning bush. Think about that. After the burning bush, what a relationship that they had built right then. No one else had that experience. What a relationship. He could have stopped right there and said, "That's enough. I don't need any more." He could have been satisfied with the 10 miraculous plagues. Think about that, the relationship that had to be there for that to take place. He could have stopped after that. He could have been satisfied with the parting of the Red Sea. He could have been satisfied with meeting God alone for 40 days on top of Mount Sinai, getting the 10 Commandments and fellowshipping with God. Think about the relationship that they would have had. He could have been satisfied with that. Even in the verse that we did not look at, the relationship that they had, they met with each other constantly and they spoke as friends. He could have been satisfied with that. What more do you need? He had everything of God that he could have wanted, but he asked for more. He asked for an even greater relationship with him. He wanted another step. He asked for more. But you know, too many of us stop at the bush. We stop right there. We're satisfied with just an introduction of God. We're satisfied with just an hour a week on a Sunday morning, but not anymore during the week. We don't want any other relationship there. I've had enough. I have just the amount of relationship that I need and that I want. That's all I want is that small relationship. We're satisfied that he saved us, and that's enough. We don't want any more in our lives. I'm too busy. I've got too much stuff. But God, Jehovah, wants to have that intimate relationship with us. He wants that relationship. So I have to ask the question, when's the last time you asked God for more? When's the last time you asked God to show you more of him? That's what Moses did. He said, show me more. I've got everything that there can be with you, but is there more? And of course there was more. And God is willing to give us more in our lives if we will just simply ask him, saying, God, I want more of a relationship with you. Many believers today say that they want to know God, but when you start to take a closer look at their lives and examine their lives and they see their lifestyles and their schedule, you realize that they're just blowing smoke. They're just talking words. They don't really mean it. But you know, people in love find time to talk to each other. People in love find ways to please each other. So how's your love relationship with God, Jehovah? Do you find time to talk to him, find ways to please him? Jehovah knows when we're just saying words, and he knows when we're truly intending to want to get to know him better. Now in chapter 34, we go on as we close here. In chapter 34, we see this event take place. The event takes place that we were just talking about. God was just telling him, I'm going to put you in this rock and I'm going to pass by and you'll be able to see me as I pass by. Now the event takes place in chapter 34. Look in verse 6. Chapter 34, verse 6. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. Notice the connection between the name Jehovah in these verses and the relationship that he has. He says in verse 6, look at it again, looking with the words a little bit differently. He passed in front of Moses proclaiming, Jehovah, Jehovah, the compassionate and gracious Elohim. Now look what he's saying here. Look at the words that he's using to describe himself. These are not words that in our study of Elohim he could have used to describe Elohim, but it describes this relationship, God, of Jehovah. He says, Jehovah, the compassionate and gracious Elohim, slow to anger, abounding in love, faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, forgiving wickedness and rebellion and sin. These are New Testament words. This is New Testament coming into the Old Testament saying, this is who I am. I'm compassionate. I'm abounding in love. I'm slow to anger. I'm gracious. I'm forgiving. This is what he's saying. This is the relationship that he wants to have with his people. And what you see right here in these verses right here, you see the plan of salvation. The New Testament plan of salvation is showing up right here in these verses in the Old Testament. In fact, what we're seeing here is because of the name, the relationship of who Jehovah is, that's really where salvation comes from. It comes from that relationship desire of his. He wants to have the relationship. If he did not want to have the relationship, he would not have made salvation possible. But it was because of that. And it says here that his forgiveness is there. God's forgiveness is a free gift, as we know, and it's made possible through his Son. When you've experienced the forgiveness of God, and when you live that personal relationship with the Creator of the world, you discover that he is the God of the present tense. He's the God of the present tense. He's continually working in your life. When we've received Christ, we come to understand the same lesson that Moses learned right here. He learned that God is I am in the present tense of his life. God is the I am in the present tense of our life. Sometimes God allows situations into our lives that we don't understand. They seem to have no possible human solution to them. And we don't understand these. But God allows these into our lives so that he can show us that he is our solution. Because he is Jehovah. This is so he can show us who he is. He lets us sometimes hit rock bottom so that he can show us that he is the rock at the bottom. Because he is Jehovah. He lets us go through a fiery furnace so that he will show us and that we can learn that he is the fourth man in the furnace waiting for us. Because he is Jehovah. And the reason for this is because our help is in the name of the Lord. He is Jehovah. And he does this so that we can form that intimate relationship with him. So do you know him as the present tense answer to the difficult situations that you're going through? Do you know God in that way? Those broken hearts that you have, those broken relationships that you have, he is Jehovah. Do you know him as the God who can deal with your anger and your resentment? He can deal with your bitterness and your bad attitudes. He can deal with that habitual sin that you're going through in your life because he is the present day I am Jehovah. He is the I am who is active and eager to change and to help you in your daily living. Whatever your present tense need is, Jehovah is the I am. He is there for us. But we can take this an extra step and we can see that Jesus is the I am of God. God, Jehovah, revealed himself in Jesus Christ. It was Christ who was Jehovah from the very beginning, who became flesh and took upon himself our sin so that we can have a relationship with him. This is all because of what Christ did. So then it's no coincidence then that Jesus, when he was on earth, used that same phrase that Jehovah used when he was introducing himself to Moses. Jesus often called himself, I am. He said, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the vine. I am the living water. Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. So he tied it together. The New Testament is tied together with the Old Testament right here because Jesus is the relationship side of God. If we want to know God, Jehovah, in a more personal way, we can only do it by getting to know his Son and what he did for us, believing on the name of his Son, for the name of Jesus Christ for our salvation. Now, I want to close our service today a little bit different as well today. I want to do it a little bit different. I want to show you a video here as we close off our time. Now, I want to explain this video a little bit to you. This video is going to be not our style. We are kind of a conservative, traditional type church when it comes to music and when it comes to displaying different ways. And I want to warn you right now, this is not our style that you're going to see, and I'm not changing styles. Don't get that at all. But what I want you to try to watch in this is try to listen and watch carefully what this guy says. He's going to talk very fast in some spots. So he's going to lose some of us, but fight through that thing. Fight through that this is not your style and you don't like what he's doing. Fight through that because what you're going to see and what you're going to hear, I think, is very, very clever and very neat. So watch this and try again to catch as much of it as you can. So if I can get some help with the lights, as that's why everybody's moving around, they were warned to do this.
Before fluorescent formations ever fomented the foundations of your firmament, that is, before the stars in your sky ever entered existence, before the light knew what bright meant, before the sky had a clue where up went, before either were ever invented, I am. Before terrestrial perennials terraced your planet's territorial terrain, that is, before the plants in your ground were ever ordained, before roots were ever arranged, before fruit had a taste, before either had a name, I am. Before the ocean had a bowl, before the surf discovered its role, before the grave was made Sheol, before man had a soul, I am. Before Eden was installed, before the garden serpent crawled, before the tree, before the fall, I am. For I am truth, before there ever could be false. I am perfection, before there ever could be faults. I am by all, in all, through all in all, and I am to be called. I am. Before the curse usurped the ground and drove you away from the divine. Before you felt this separation between who you are and the intention of your design. Before you tried to abide in sources of death in order to find life. Before you combined yourself with any form of pleasure you could find. Before you felt so alone, before you felt so dry, before you tried to run away from my side, I am the vine. Before the cherubim ever guarded the garden, before the flaming sword was ever sharpened, before that chasm between God and man was ever widened, before you lost all hope in becoming a citizen of heaven, before all you earned was endless flame, before all you deserved was righteous pain, before you were sheep hoping not just to be some lion's prey, before you were a lost lamb longing for a pen, longing to escape your fate, I am the gate. Before sustenance turned to gluttony and food became an enemy, before attraction was based on anatomy and sex was removed from matrimony, before money became morality and greed grew into the only causality, before you were empty without me, before you tried to satisfy your appetite with anything, before you strived to feel alive by filling your strife with the fleeting vices of your fleshly devices, before your hunger for relief left pangs in your side, I am the bread of life. Before you became acquainted with pain and death, before you ever tasted loneliness, before disease destroyed what you possess, before eyes could go blind, before ears could go deaf, before you lost the one you love to the grave's unyielding cleft, I am. For before mankind stopped living so that they might just survive, I am the resurrection and the life. Before that sadness that grips your mind led you to darkness and thoughts of suicide, before that distortion of man hurt you so that you now hurt yourself, before you knew razors and risks could create a new hell, before those wounds turned to scars and those scars became a way of life, I am the light. For before you even knew how to sin, I am where your salvation begins. For before you withdrew from the path of my way, before you willfully and joyously disobeyed, before you betrayed the gift that I gave of that breath in your lungs, that life in your airways, by saying no to my love and yes to your heresy, before you engaged with the enemy, waged in sin with intensity, before you deranged my supremacy, inflamed my jealousy, before you chose greed over my adequacy, lies over my accuracy, pride over my advocacy, before you chose your sinful self over me, I am the good shepherd who lays down his life for his sheep. For before you were a spotted lamb, I am. For I am the way before you could ever run away from my call. I am the truth before you could ever walk away from my law. I am the life before you could ever turn away from my cross at Golgotha's skull. So I beg you now to withdraw. Withdraw from your sin, for I am your only temptation. Withdraw from yourself, for I am making you a new creation. Withdraw from your pride, for I am ruining your reputation. Withdraw from your self-righteousness, for I am your only mediation. Withdraw from your hopes and dreams, for I am your only expectation. Withdraw from your life, for I am your crucifixion. For before all time, I am all sufficient. Before all titles and designations, to my name alone did the cosmos listen. For I am Jesus, I am the Word, I am Elohim, I am the Lord, I am the Christ, I am Messiah, I am Creator, I am Jehovah Jireh. I'm the name of God, I am Emmanuel, I'm the begotten Son, I am the Holy One of Israel. I am the first fruits, I am the Prince of Peace, I am the bridegroom, I am the King of Kings. I'm the God of Abraham, I'm the God of Jacob, I am the Alpha, I am the Omega, I'm the Holy One worthy of praise. So with joy to my side, with joy be made mine, with joy with me stay, withdraw into my way.
Let's stand together and we'll close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for our time that we've been able to share together today, looking to your word. We thank you for the challenge that we even just have heard, how you are every part of our life, and you are providing each part that we need. You are our existence. We pray, Lord, you'd help us to desire that more time with you, that desire that relationship with you as we go through our day-to-day existence. Help us to be eager to learn more about you, to be eager to read your word, to be eager to draw closer to you, withdraw from ourselves. And we pray that you'd help us to just know more. Help us now as we're dismissed, the things that we do today would be honoring and pleasing to you. We ask this in thy name.